The day he asked the court to split what he never helped build, he smiled like a man ordering dessert, not dismantling a life. "Half," he said calmly, fingers folded, voice smooth. "I'm entitled to half of everything she gained after the marriage." Not a tremor, not a doubt, just entitlement wrapped in a tailored suit. The room didn't react, but silence can be louder than protest. It stretches, it judges, it waits. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't look at my attorney. I watched him, the confidence, the posture, the practiced innocence. It was the same expression he used at charity galas and investor dinners. The face of a man who believed presentation was proof. He thought this was negotiation. It was autopsy. Before I tell you what I handed the judge and why it ended the performance instantly, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always wonder how far these stories travel and who needs them most. Let me take you back to how this began, because outcomes only make sense when you understand the design. I design risk models for a living, not the flashy kind you see on trading apps. I build failure maps for companies before they collapse. My work is studying stress points, hidden liabilities, and silent fractures inside systems that look profitable from the outside. I get paid to predict where things will break and how to reinforce them before they do. The irony is almost embarrassing now. I could audit a multinational structure in 2 days, but I ignored the instability in my own home for 5 years. In my field, we say every disaster leaves clues. Load strain, heat marks, micro cracks. Nothing fails without whispering first. But emotional fraud is different. It wears polish instead of pressure lines. It performs stability. I believed competence in one arena translated to wisdom in another. It doesn't. You can be brilliant at reading balance sheets and still misread a human being. You can detect market bubbles and still live inside a personal one. Looking back, the warning signs weren't hidden. They were simply flattering. And flattery is the most expensive blindfold ever invented. I met him at a leadership summit I didn't want to attend. I was there out of obligation, not ambition, seated near the aisle, answering emails between panels, already planning my exit. Conferences are predictable ecosystems, rehearsed confidence, recycled ideas, aggressive handshakes. I was invisible by choice. He approached without introducing himself. He commented on the speaker's risk projection model, not with praise, but with a precise critique. One flaw, one variable overlooked. He was right too, not loudly right, quietly right, which is far more dangerous. That was the hook. He didn't try to impress me. He aligned with my thinking. Conversation felt frictionless, like continuing a sentence I had started internally. No performance, no push, just resonance, or what felt like it. Later, I would understand the tactic. He didn't present himself. He reflected me. My interests, my frustrations, my vocabulary. People trust mirrors faster than strangers. At the time, I called it rare compatibility. In retrospect, it was reconnaissance wearing charm. He never rushed the relationship. He engineered it. There's a difference. Rushing is loud. Engineering is patient. He learned my pressure points the way a negotiator studies leverage. What exhausted me, what validated me, what made me feel seen after long weeks of invisible labor. Then he supplied it. Consistently, precisely, almost scientifically. When I was overloaded, he became supportive. When I doubted myself, he became certain. When I succeeded, he became proud, but always in a way that subtly included himself in the achievement. Not attached to the victory, embedded in it. He didn't demand space in my life. He replaced empty space, scheduled things I postponed, handled details I ignored, anticipated needs I hadn't spoken. It felt like relief, and relief is a powerful bonding agent. Patterns only become obvious when you stop standing inside them. Every generous act also increased dependency. Every solution he offered reduced my independent friction. Every convenience carried a small transfer of control. It wasn't domination, it was gradual centralization. By the time I noticed the structure, he wasn't beside my life. He was operating inside its control room. The trigger wasn't romance, conflict, or betrayal. It was money. Sudden, unplanned, inherited money. My aunt passed without warning. She had been a quiet investor, the kind who never discussed numbers, but always asked sharp questions. When the estate cleared, I received controlling shares in 2 logistics companies and a liquidity payout I hadn't expected. I felt weight, not excitement. Stewardship, not celebration. He felt acceleration. Before I finished explaining the structure of the assets, he was already describing expansion strategies, visibility moves, positioning opportunities. His language shifted overnight from partnership to scale, from we're stable to we're underleveraged. Grief requires stillness. He proposed velocity. The week after the transfer finalized, he left his consulting contract, voluntarily, abruptly, calling it a strategic pivot. He said he could now focus full-time on optimizing our capital footprint. Our, not mine, not yours, not the estate's, our. The most dangerous 4-letter word, when incentives are unequal. That was the moment the temperature changed. Not enough to alarm me, just enough to fog the glass. The spending didn't start with extravagance. It started with justification. Every purchase had a thesis. Every transfer had a narrative. He never said, I want this. He said, this positions us. That single word turned indulgence into strategy. He upgraded tools we didn't need, subscribed to intelligence platforms he never opened, hired advisors who spoke in jargon but produced no models. Money began moving faster than verification. When I questioned the velocity, he questioned my vision. You're thinking like a custodian, he told me once, tapping the table for emphasis, not like an owner. That line was meant to shrink me, and it almost worked. He began redirecting funds into speculative vehicles, complex, trendy, poorly understood. When one of them cratered, he didn't show regret. He showed irritation that I noticed. Loss, to him, wasn't danger, it was inconvenience. The conversations changed shape, less discussion, more persuasion, less transparency, more summaries. I realized I was no longer reviewing decisions, I was being briefed on them after execution. Control rarely disappears in a dramatic takeover. It migrates quietly, signature by signature, permission by permission, until you realize you're being informed about your own resources. I didn't uncover the betrayal through confession or confrontation. I found it through formatting. One night, while preparing a quarterly exposure report, I noticed a projection deck on our shared drive that didn't match any of our active ventures. The branding was unfamiliar, but the modeling style was unmistakable. Mine. My frameworks, my risk language, my structure. Only the company name was different. I opened it expecting a draft template. It was a launch plan, a parallel firm, same sector, same network targets, same supplier pipeline, built to compete directly, funded by transfers, routed through accounts he managed temporarily. Even worse, 2 of my mid-level analysts were listed as committed pending transition. He wasn't mismanaging capital. He was redeploying it away from me. People imagine betrayal as emotional, raised voices, broken trust, visible drama. Real betrayal is procedural. It hides in spreadsheets, signatures, and scheduled calls you were never meant to see. I didn't feel rage. Rage is hot and loud. What I felt was cold alignment, like tumblers in a lock clicking into place. The question was no longer whether the structure was compromised. The question was how to document the failure without alerting the saboteur. I didn't confront him. Confrontation warns the problem. Documentation solves it. The next morning, I called the one attorney I knew who treated disputes like forensic investigations instead of emotional events. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked what could be proven. That's how I knew I chose correctly. We met in a quiet office with no decorative awards, only file cabinets and a whiteboard. I laid out the transfers, the duplicate venture, the staff outreach, the authority creep. He listened without interrupting, then drew a simple diagram. Access, intent, benefit. If we can evidence all three, as he said, we don't argue, we demonstrate. From that day forward, I stopped reacting and started recording. Every authorization request went through traceable channels. Every financial movement required written rationale. System logs were preserved. Version histories were locked. Silence became my camouflage. At home, nothing changed on the surface. I asked about his day. I nodded at his projections. I let him explain plans that would never mature. He mistook calm for compliance. He didn't realize the environment had changed. He thought he was still moving freely inside the system. He was already inside the audit. By the time we entered the courtroom, the outcome was already built. It just hadn't been displayed yet. He spoke first, confident, expansive. He described himself as a strategic partner, a growth driver, an operational architect behind my success. The language was polished enough to sound rehearsed, vague enough to avoid verification. Performance thrives where records are absent. When our turn came, my attorney didn't argue character. He didn't debate contribution. He asked permission to submit a sealed packet to the bench. The judge opened it slowly. Contracts first, then authorization trails, then the access logs, time-stamped entries, failed permission escalations, transfer chains that looped through holding accounts before landing in the shadow venture. Paper is unemotional. That's why it wins. My husband leaned forward at first, still relaxed, still certain this was procedural theatre. Then he saw the flow charts, arrows mapping decisions he claimed he never made, approvals he insisted were implied, attempts to override controls he said he respected. Confidence doesn't collapse gradually. It disconnects, like power cut at the source. The judge didn't look at me. She looked at him, the way a systems engineer looks at a breach report. The decision wasn't dramatic. No speeches, no moral lecture, just precision. The judge summarized the record the way a technician summarizes a failure report. Method, evidence, conclusion. She noted the asset firewall agreement we had signed before marriage. She cited the unauthorized reallocations. She referenced the attempted control overrides like line items on a checklist. He tried to interrupt twice. Both times he was stopped with a raised finger, not a raised voice. Authority never needs volume. His claim, facade, that influence equals ownership, dissolved under documentation. Contribution requires traceable input, not personal narrative. Support is not equity. Proximity is not entitlement. Then came the part he never modelled. Not only was he denied any share of the inherited assets and core holdings, he was assigned sole responsibility for the liabilities generated through his unilateral actions. Leases, speculative losses, advisory retainers, all of it. He had tried to merge upside and distribute downside. The ruling reversed it completely. You could see the math finally reach him. Not emotionally, numerically. The realization that persuasion had lost to proof. The gavel didn't sound like victory. It sounded like closure. After the ruling, the world outside the courtroom mirrored the collapse inside. He retreated. Not with dignity, but with the quiet shuffle of someone who had miscalculated the terrain. His reputation, carefully curated over years of charm and selective visibility, unravelled. Clients withdrew interest. Colleagues who had admired him now whispered caution. Even his proposed venture dissolved before the ink on contracts had dried. Meanwhile, I reclaimed more than money. I reclaimed clarity. The people he tried to poach returned, embarrassed by their own susceptibility, but grateful for accountability. I didn't punish them. Mistakes aren't crimes, but I rebuilt boundaries, reinforced workflows, and made sure every key player understood the structure of trust and consequence. Freedom, I realized, is not a single event. It is the accumulation of enforced boundaries, documented evidence, and self-respect restored incrementally. And when he reached out afterward, long, rambling, justifying, demanding acknowledgement of potential lost, I forwarded the messages to the attorney and let silence handle the conversation. Victory had nothing to do with vengeance. It had everything to do with precision, foresight, and unwavering patience. I didn't keep what he tried to claim. I transformed it. I established a fund to support innovators and creators navigating sudden financial independence. People with talent but without protection, who might otherwise fall prey to manipulation or mismanagement. It wasn't charity, it was architecture, constructing a foundation strong enough to survive storms, flexible enough to grow, and transparent enough that no one could appropriate it for selfish gain. I named it after the mentor who taught me that resilience is built, not inherited. The person who showed me that a legacy isn't measured in numbers, but in structures you leave standing for others to build upon. 6 months after the verdict, I walked the rooftop of a completed project. A building once slated for demolition, now restored and reimagined. Wind in my hair, sky ahead. I felt finally the balance I had studied in markets, in risk, in engineering, and in human behaviour, realised in my own life. The lesson is not simply that justice can prevail or that cleverness can outwit deceit. The lesson is that integrity, foresight, and deliberate action create structures stronger than any deception. That wealth without wisdom is fragile. That self-worth, when fortified, becomes a lighthouse, tall, guiding, unyielding, and untouchable. If you take nothing else from this story, remember this: protecting your foundation is the most radical act of creation you can undertake. Build it wisely, build it for yourself, and leave a legacy that no one can dismantle.